earlier, I think you said that your evidence then was that information was incorrect.
The $42,000 salary, yes, we said that was incorrect at the time. And any cadet...
You're saying, so the salary, it wasn't $42,000 or in that vicinity at the time?
No, we're saying the first cadets who come on, they're working in New Zealand, they'll get paid an average salary of between, I think it's 64 and 71,000 based on the current roster builds that we're seeing in our pilots in New Zealand. We said an average salary of $67,000 versus a New Zealand average salary of $39,000, and when they're working in Australia, they're on an Australian contract, and they get paid around 87,000 Australian dollars.
But I've been advised that the contract shows that the guaranteed minimum pay is New Zealand $42,000 a year. Could that be the case? So it's a minimum pay of $42,000 compared to what they might actually get?
What they're referring to there is someone working 11.3 hours a week, and of course someone's working 11.3 hours a week, they will get paid less. That salary number that has been quoted by other sources as well excludes annual leave, it excludes the allowances, and therefore is not a correct representation of someone working as a pilot in New Zealand.
Right, so subparagraph 19.1a states that the base salary set out in Schedule 3, which states that the guaranteed minimum pay is $42,000 New Zealand a year. That doesn't include those other matters you referred to.
It doesn't, and it's for working 11.3 hours a week.
Well, I think it's fair to say, I mean, the numbers that Bruce quoted are our expectation of what the pilots will get paid. That number is not a realistic expectation because we're not going to have any of the cadets flying that low level of hours. So it's a difference between what's the minimum level in the contract and the full expectations of what the pilots are going to earn.
But the minimum level in the contract, it could be, and you have minimum levels, so the minimum levels could be $42,000 a year. So you can see, yeah, so I understand, but let's put it in perspective, into context. I just want to ask about these cadets. Where are they now, these 4 cadets that were referred to in the meeting?
4 cadets are in Australia now.
And are they working for Jetstar?
They've just, might get Mark Ryan-Flesh to comment on exactly where they are.
They're currently based on the east coast of Australia. They're currently transferring from the New Zealand arrangements under a leave without pay basis onto the Australian contract.
So they're not being paid at the moment?
They are being paid at the moment.
Oh, sorry, leave with pay, did you?
They're in the process of transferring over from the New Zealand arrangements to the leave without pay arrangement when they'll be then paid on the Australian.
So they won't be prejudiced in the longer term in terms of their careers with Jetstar. Can you just explain this to me? They're on New Zealand contracts at the moment, is that right?
They joined the organisation, they were given roles in New Zealand on New Zealand contracts, which is where we ultimately want them to be flying. Yeah. They've come across, so they don't miss a pay period, so there's no misconception here. When they're not in a hiatus where they're put on the bench and they're not getting paid for a period of time. Once they get moved into an Australian role, they then get paid in Australian dollars, and New Zealand salary stops, and they get paid in an Australian salary.
Sure. But they finish there, but they can't fly in Australia at the moment, can they?
They can't fly in Australia until they're established under the Australian terms and conditions. They are qualified now to fly in Australia. We're just going through that transfer process.
There's one thing I don't understand. I don't want to labour this because I want to ask about safety management systems and fatigue, which is a particular concern that's been put to me by a number of pilots. But they can't fly in New Zealand, though, can they? They're intended to fly in New Zealand, but they can't actually. They can't actually fly in New Zealand.
The situation in terms of where they can fly, when we set up the cadet pilot scheme by agreement with CASA, we decided that the best place for for all the cadets to get their initial qualifications and experience was with the group of pilots that fly around the east coast of Australia. It gives them the greatest exposure to different groups and the exposure to the most experienced captains. So we agreed that they would be based in that area. That doesn't preclude them from flying within New Zealand. It's a matter of it's really a matter of keeping a close eye on them. Several of our Australian pilots fly, or numerous Australian pilots based in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, fly regularly in New Zealand.
But isn't it the case that they did do training they were trained in New Zealand as well?
They're ab initio to their initial type rating training. They haven't been trained by Jetstar in New Zealand, no.
Right. Or did they do any training with Jetstar in New Zealand?
There's been, I think, one pilot flew a training flight from Christchurch to Auckland return in New Zealand with a very experienced training pilot.
But these pilots couldn't actually fly to New Zealand upon completion of their training, could they?
Yes, they could.
There's no issue with where they fly. What we're trying to do, and the term probably the difficulty for the committee, term cadets is getting bandied around in terms of a very broad period of time, because part of it's the time they were CTC in Oxford doing their training course. Part of it then is this process now where they've actually started flying with us, and part of it will be they'll continue on their cadet contract for a 6-year period. So the term cadet gets put around all of that. We're dealing with a specific part of the period of time now where they're coming in, and we want them exposed to our most experienced captains for the first 500 to 1,000 hours of flying.
In New Zealand, though, isn't it the case, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that you can't pilot public transport aircraft even as a first officer unless you've got 500 hours airtime. Is that the case or not?
That's under the New Zealand rules, and no pilots of ours have flown outside of those rules. The pilot that flew in New Zealand had nearly 800 hours experience.
Right. But the other cadets did or didn't have that 500 hours minimum?
The other cadets have not flown aeroplanes in New Zealand. The training they were doing there was the cadet pilot training scheme prior to coming and working with Jetstar.
Sure. Can I just go on the issue of fatigue management? I know that Captain Wilson and Mr Gissing made reference to that. I received an email that I might just show to Mr Buchanan dated the 7th of January that the name of the person's been, the addressee and the person who wrote it's been deleted. By my understanding is he had a position with Jetstar at the time out of the Perth base, managing the roster of the Perth base. I don't know if you've seen that email. I don't think it's necessary to mention the person's name, so as not to cause them any embarrassment. But
great things emails, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could share, but I thought the fair thing to do was just to put it. Have you had a chance to? Have you seen that email before?
No, I've never seen this email.
Yeah. It goes to a cultural issue. I mean, the Chair, if I could table that in due course. It starts off by saying, this email comes with a warning. If you're easily offended, then delete this email and read no further. Next paragraph, toughen up, princesses. Next paragraph, you aren't fatigued, you are tired and can't be bothered going to work. And then it was quite scathing, as I understand it, of pilots at the Perth base who were complaining about issues of fatigue and getting leave. Is the person who was running the Perth base still in that position?
We don't have anyone in our business that works as running Perth-based roster, so I don't know. I'd have to investigate and find out where this came from.
Do you have a pilot that's that is in charge or is a senior pilot for that base, in terms of the way you structure things?
No.
Yes, we do, and that structure has changed. Changed late last year, but we have a pilot who's responsible for overseeing the Perth operation and the management of pilots in Perth.
And is that the same pilot from January of this year?
From January of this year, yes, it is. As I say, the structure has changed. We used to have people called base pilots. They've now had someone put in on top.
Can I make a comment on this, which I think is important? You know, I think if there's a potential here for a warehouse of information and accusations and material to be compiled and accumulated against the airlines, there is a process that we do go through. And actually, it's in our interest to know about these things, and it's in the safety interests for the aviation market in Australia for us to know about these things. And the fact that people are holding them back, when there's plenty of processes and procedures within the current framework for these to be reported. It could have been reported to CASA, and CASA would have done an investigation. It could have been reported into Jetstar Safety. It could have been reported into the whistleblower process that we have in the Qantas group. We have so many different mechanisms that these claims can be investigated, and it's very hard, you can understand, for the management here to be received and to be given notes on the spur of the moment When these things can go through a proper investigation, and if somebody has done something wrong outside of the parameters that the company is operated in, that will be dealt with, that will be stopped, and we'll make sure that it doesn't occur again. That's what the safety management system is all about, and there's plenty of mechanisms for that to occur. I have to say I'm very disappointed that these things are being built up like this, because it's not in the interests of safety that that's occurring, and we need to get them to come through the proper processes and the proper diligence to make sure that's happening.
I think, Mr Joyce, the issue has been that a number of Jetstar pilots have come forward to speak. They don't want to be public on it. They're concerned that was a cultural issue at that particular base, where complaints about fatigue were treated quite dismissively, and they didn't feel confident in the system.
And I think, as I said,
and you can understand that concern.
I can understand, and we are communicating all the time. There is plenty of opportunities, if there is concerns about this, for them to express in different ways. The PricewaterhouseCoopers whistleblower system, for example, is completely independent. CASA could have been told about this and would have done an investigation on it. But what's worrying us as well, and the note we haven't read out, very clearly shows on the record for us that there's misinformation, misleading information that's out there, and that misleading information is being used to make accusations and claims about the organisation and Jetstar, and it's clearly wrong from what we've seen. And what worries me is that unless we go through the proper due diligence process, the proper investigation process of all of these, they could be in the same category. And you can understand my suspicion after reading this note from one of our pilots about an issue that was raised here in the committee, and this pilot says it was not true and he was misrepresented to this committee.
No, this is a separate issue, though.
Yeah, but that's my point is all of these should follow that process that we have there, because it will be properly investigated and the material will be looked at, and if there's something wrong, it will be fixed.
But have there been complaints about the roster, about the Perth Singapore roster, or the Darwin Singapore roster, for instance?
I think it's fair to say, like, the Darwin Singapore is a good example where there's been no fatigue issues raised.
No fatigue issues, you say?
No fatigue issues on that particular roster pattern. In fact, when we look through our records on that one, and we've recently changed, a good example of fatigue risk management process working well, where in December when we started the Melbourne-Singapore direct services on the A330s, we consolidated our Darwin flights and we upgraded the aircraft to an A321. That then resulted in, because of the larger aircraft, we were exceeding our own duty time limitations on the Darwin Singapore sector and a number of sectors we were finding in January. The guys through the Airline Safety Committee put a number of actions in place in January. The number went down to a smaller number in February, more than halved the problem. But the guys still weren't happy with it in February, and February made the decision to overnight the crew in Singapore. And that's a good example of the fatigue risk management processes and the internal processes working well. But it's not even about individual fatigue reports from pilots. It's about ourselves looking proactively at the compliance and about what are we doing in terms of our own internal statistics, and then proactively responding to that.
But what does it say when some pilots feel that they need to give this information to senators because they feel that systemically that the system in place at Jetstar is lacking, or that there isn't a culture where those concerns could be treated seriously?
I think if you look at all the evidence of what's actually happening inside Jetstar, you look at the responses, you look at what the proactive things have been done on rosters, what's happening, for instance, on the SEQ base in last year, what's happened in terms of our building up of the fatigue risk management process, what we've done on the Singapore Darwin services, any of the evidence you look at where we're finding issues in our business, we're proactively resolving them. And we get thousands and thousands of reports. We have one of the highest reporting rates across the group in Jetstar. And so I don't see any evidence either on that basis or on external audits. We've had 12 major external audits in the last 12 years, and all the evidence suggests from them that our business is actually...
And we'll go to the issue of CASA as well in a moment, but you've said there haven't been any complaints about the Darwin Singapore flights, but on the 26th of March, what's that, just a few days ago, did the Jetstar Pilot Committee representative meet with the chief pilot in management, and that for the JQ 5758 Darwin Singapore return flights, the Jetstar Pilot Committee has been successful after lobbying case from the company in reverting this to an overnight in Singapore.
That's incorrect. The decision was made in February through the